very warm welcome to all of you to our ECM diskurs. It's the 27th, and I'm very happy and honored to announce that I will speak today with Bonaventure Ndikung. We have invited you to engage with us on the question of the assembly. We have discussed today in the ECM with our students for the whole day on what this, on the one hand, political term, on the other hand, trendy term in the exhibition field could mean. And let me present you, before we will hear this lecture, Bonaventure Ndikung. Bonaventure is a very, I think, important voice in the curatorial field today. You are the director of an art space in Berlin called Savvy Contemporary, also related to a journal with the same name. And with this space, I think you have in the last years shown that it is possible to think to think contemporary art from a universalist perspective with a lot of African knowledge. With a very serious curatorial practice, you have intervened in a field that is increasingly trying to open up for non-Western perspective, very often with a lot of problematic basic assumptions. And the practice of Savvy Contemporary is just there. It's just serious work. It's just bringing together and following questions. With a lot of what we have read today in Judith Butler of what she called persistence and resistance. Besides that, you are now also curator at large of the next documenta. And I'm glad that this is the case. We will see what will happen. There's a relation between Bonaventure Ndikung and ECM since some years. We met when we presented our book in Berlin, the Handbuch, Ausstellungstheorie und Praxis, and actually you got in touch with us.
Yes.
This is how I gratefully got to know you. And since then we couldn't stop thinking together. One day we went with our students from Vienna to Berlin, and we went to see Savvy Contemporary. We were all very impressed. And then we started a discussion from the perspective of one of the students. A question came up that at this first moment felt a bit embarrassing to me, whatever this might say about me. And the question was, is the museum not a Western concept? And while I was very embarrassed, you were very calm and, as I said, serious. And instead of making the student feel bad about the question, you said something that since then sticks in my mind and has totally changed my way of working on my book, actually. Mm-hmm. And your answer was, not the museum is a Western concept, but the idea that the museum is a Western concept is a Western concept. So actually since then I more and more understand that we have to critically review our idea of what a museum is, and this is what we owe you. And in this sense I'm very grateful that you again engage in a debate that we have here and that you accepted to prepare a lecture on the question on the assembly. I guess you will talk about the title yourself. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, dear Nora, for the wonderful introduction. Thanks a lot to Beatrice for the organization, which I already said before. I must apologize that it didn't flow as smoothly as one would expect, at least from my perspective. I'm very grateful to be here, very happy to be here. And I must say I have also learned a lot since I got to know you. I don't know how often we've met since then, and it's always been quite challenging. And it's always like a kind of a boxing game, if I may put it that way. So I think reflecting together, deliberating together has been something I've cherished a lot in the past years, and I would like that to continue in that way. That said, I'll just dive into what I prepared for today. I will start with a disclaimer, which is that I do not know if what I'm going to read to you, if what I prepared, will do justice to the topic of assembly. But I will try all the same. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a couple of, it's going to be a kind of a collage of a few, thought processes. And as processes are, they do not necessarily have to get to the end, So I'm in the middle of thinking about what to talk about, and basically did that yesterday night and today when I landed. So you will see that it's still in the becoming, and also you will see the fatigue in my eyes. So whenever I fall asleep, just wake me up. So when Nora asked, I thought of what to do. In Cameroon, where I come from, and I'll read that again. When you depart from somebody, you say, on est ensemble. And which is a kind of a strange thing to say, because you're not ensemble. You're definitely going different directions, But I think that's a very beautiful way of saying that we will meet again. It's like calling the spirit, wanting you to meet again. So I thought it was a beautiful title for it, if you're talking about assembly and coming together and so on and so forth, The other thing is that I stumbled on this work, which I saw in Bamako, of a young Algerian artist, and I'll also read that at some point. It was called Nassim Roushish. And I was very impressed by the work, and I thought I would like to write about it. Interestingly, the work is called WAKA, which is also Cameroonian. This Algerian guy comes up with this thing, and it's pidgin, it's Franglais. And let me just read. Okay. As the abstract already said, like most of you, I've been trying to deal with this, this undercommons. Again, it's a process, because it's just so heavy, so strong, so important for our time. And I've been trying to understand it bit by bit, and it's actually Nora that pointed me to it. And since then, I've been like, trying to find my own space within it. So I'll start with a quote from Harney and Morton. Some people want to run things. Other things want to run. If they ask you, tell them we are flying. Knowledge of freedom is in the invention of escape, stealing away in the confines in the form of a break. This is held close in the open song of the ones who are supposed to be silent. So basically this says it all, but I'll just try to continue. How can we understand concepts of spaces of flight, spaces and concepts of escape, as spaces and concepts of creativity and artistic expressions? So these are the questions I will try to tackle here. And conversely, how can we think of exhibition making as an act of assembly of notions, peoples, and histories? So the title of this lecture, WAKA, takes its cue from the pidgin expression that actually means all will be well. WAKA in itself means to walk, to journey, to be in motion. From that same context, the popular phrase upon farewell is on est ensemble, we are together, which is almost a frantic invocation, an incantation of an eminent reassembly. I would like to use these two expressions of motion. On the one hand, an outward movement, a divergence, a kind of detachment, a kind of descent in the form of WAKA that at the same time also stands for an affirmation, Sava WAKA. And on the other hand, an inward movement, an assembly, and a get-together, on est ensemble, to deliberate on what exhibition making could also be. And I'm putting the focus now on also. I'm not saying that that is what exhibition making is, but what it could also be. So what I would do is to take you on a few detours around Simon Jami's concept of the Xenopolis. So last year, Simon Jami, the curator, did a show in Berlin called the Xenopolis. And I found, I don't know about the show, but the concept for the show was quite interesting. Just the word itself, like the city, the dwelling place of the stranger. And I found it extremely interesting. And I said I will write something about that too. Because it also goes hand in hand with this idea of, of the undercommon in a certain way. So then, of course, the undercommons and fugitivity, and Lefebvre's and Soya's concept of the third space. And then something I added into the lecture recently was Baldwin's reflection of the creative process. Unfortunately, they all became male. I'll do better next time. All in a bid to talk about the exhibition of and in everyday, the exhibition of and in precarity, the exhibition in the state of flux, and the exhibition as we know it. I have chosen to use the photographic works of Algerian artist Nassim Rouchiche, born in 1977, from this series, Sava WAKA, to buttress, to substantiate the ideas that will unfold in this presentation. That's why they're just flowing there. The series is a ghostly double exposure peeping into a settlement of illegal migrants that made their way through the Sahara Desert, found an oasis in Algiers, and preparing the leap into that unknown jungle or paradise it may be, called Europe. So what I call an oasis here is a hole. That place each guerrilla fighter needs to retreat to in order to plan the next steps. It is oblique, opaque, gloomy, and a dodgy space. The settlement evidently becomes a resting spot, a spot of assembly, where the people on their journey revitalize, they rejuvenate, reorganize, reconsider, where they refuge. Interestingly, in Rouchiche's images, the inhabitants of this space, the fugitives, are almost always absent or condemned to that state of undecidability, which is, of course, Derrida saying that. A space of uncertainty, fragility, precarity, but of strength, determination, and inhabited with life. Rouchiche's work becomes important here, not only as an art piece, but as a revelation of the layers that such spaces embody, and the performativity within such spaces. The state of fugitivity is a state of utter performativity, the denial of non-performativity, and the denial of stagnation. It is a state of an extended penultimumness. If one were to look at it from the etymological point of view, that is the X, the haber, or the habere, which literally would mean to hold out to hold forth, then Rouchiche's work, like what I'm trying to do in this paper, is about looking again at the crux of exhibitions, which could be about holding out, holding forth, making things bare, making the being bare, as well as the condition, the demeanor, the appearance, which is what makes up the habitus or the habitat. This is to say that
Do you want to show them? Because now we see only one.
I want to show them very much. The habitat in Nassim Rushdie's series will serve here as the undefined assembly, sometimes even if it's just one person, that makes the Xenopolis and conceptualizes the fugitivity of that undercommon. So basically, I tried to divide it in three sections. So section one is the performativity of evanescence. So one of the possibilities of reading Simon Jami's concept of the Xenopolis is through the prism of the non-inhabitant, those who are on the run, who have no chance to have decided not to settle, who embody, live, or are in the state of movement. The proposal is that every place has its own Xenopolis, made up of those that are not seen or made invisible by the society, those whose vibrant existence is underneath the third layer of shells, or those that exist within the third space, those that assemble not because they are told to come together, but whose assembly is a matter of survival, of emergency, or conviviality in states of emergency and precariousness. An appropriate way of understanding the concept of Xenopolis, and thereby the concept of fugitivity, will thus be to look at all those that live offbeat, arrhythmic in relation to the norm, as in the concept of the refugee, the dishwashers, squatters, the system D, the D comes from debrouillard, which is essentially the ingenuity economy, the economy of improvisation and self-reliance, which apparently accounts for $10 trillion of the planet's GDP and employs millions of people all around the world as citizens of what we might call the Xenopolis. So cogitating on the idea of the fugitive, Haberstam writes, it talks of those spaces and modalities that exist separate from the logical, logistical, the housed, and the positioned. That space of being together in homelessness, a sought-after state of dispossession, a state wherein the refusal of what has been refused reigns. So what I'm trying to do is to imagine that fugitivity as an act of radical thought that departs from the societal context towards, and as a framework, in and from which to imagine conviviality, mutuality, and creativity beyond well-treaded paths. One could think here of a space where the tempo and the senses of context are not determined by a norm, but by the dynamism of that fugitive public. For every society, there exists a reflection or a parallel Xenopolis, whereby if the Xenopolis is the ungovernable, then the society in question is the governable or the governor. It is in this Xenopolis that the fugitive enlightenment is enacted, and actually where the shots are being pulled. As knowledge of freedom is in invention of escape stealing away in the confines and the form of a break, as I said earlier on in the quote. So fugitivity is time warping. It is proliferating and erasing. It's breaking temporal and geographical bounds. Fugitivity is the Haiti slave revolt. It is the 2012 London riots. It is the millions of refugees from Syria to Europe. It is the thousands of Icelanders demonstrating against their leader after the publishing of the Panama Papers. But it is also the man talking to himself on the street, the notion of insanity, and much more. It is in the divergence the so-called WAKA, that the fugitives converge. It is in the motionful assembling that the third space is created. It is in such spaces, public and private alike, that art finds its meaning and in which art manifests itself. It is in such spaces, more than in galleries and museums, that actions, operations, and other iterations reveal or feed art. I guess what I am trying to say here is that at least in my practice as an exhibition maker, I am interested in the complicated manifestations of effervescence, the subliminal, and ephemerality within the quotidian, especially that quotidian of those that inhabit such spaces. The spaces, I mean the spaces under the radar and behind the curtains. Those dwellers of the Xenopolis and other third spaces. What will be the next chapter I called Accommodating the Social and the Lived Space. A friend of mine was doing a research on an art project on food and eating habits of African migrants in Berlin. What he immediately noticed was that in his investigation, there was only a certain depth he could go. There was a certain way people would talk to him in a restaurant if he presented himself as an artist, or just as a Nigerian seeking to be part of a community in the diaspora. But what also became evident was that the restaurants he visited were often the first layer, under which a lot of other practices, societies, businesses existed. Interestingly, if I were to ask a Cameroonian in Berlin to recommend for me a Cameroonian restaurant in Berlin, he or she would most likely give me the name of or an address of a barber shop. The idea being that the barber shop I would go to actually functions as a barber shop, but the layer that exists underneath the barber shop might include a church and then a restaurant. Needless to say that it is not everyone that has access to, that can get access to these different layers. This analogy I am using is to point towards spaces in flux, spaces that continually and rapidly change, not only in their physicality, but in their in conceptualization as space, but also the way they are accommodated and experienced as spaces of assembling, but also spaces of dissonances. So from a Lefebvrean perspective, as elaborated in his production of space, social space is a product of many a complex social construction, which have an impact on the way spaces are perceived, accommodated, and how practices unfold within these spaces. My interest and reflections on the concepts of exhibitions has always been to see how such spaces, like the restaurant behind the church and behind the barber shop, are produced. What are the social intersections, and in what degree they need to relate to produce and maintain such spaces? My interest is in the fragility and temporality of such spaces. The complexity of the spatial existence of such spaces can be seen in what one might call pop-up restaurants. With pop-up, I do not mean something like the fanciful and economy of pop-up design stores, but rather the pop-upness of fugitivity. This is to say, the restaurants that open up, run for a few months, become a kind of a cultural center, a kind of a social hub for a group of people, until the police or the Ordnungsamt discovers their existence. As soon as the restaurant is closed down, it pops up like a mushroom in another place. And without advertisement on internet, radio, TV, or otherwise, people that have access to and inhabit such spaces of fugitivity know where to head to. So in his reflections on space theory, Lefebvre already described the triad of spatial existence, which Edward Sawyer expatiated upon in his theory of spatial trialectics, in his Thirdspace, Journeys to Los Angeles and Other Real and Imagined Spaces. So according to Sawyer, first spaces are physical spaces that are measurable, plottable, mappable, spaces of cartographic nature. They are spaces one sees with the bird's eye view, which is a wide and a kind of compartmentalized view of space. Second spaces are, on the other hand, spaces one creates to conceptualize the first space. So the second space is where we would normally situate the kind of the art world we function in, as it is that space of representation, be it through art or advertisement. Sometimes you don't even know the difference. It is that space where we conceive on a daily basis in our thoughts and ideas. But what has become extremely important for me in terms of thinking about exhibitions is what Sawyer termed his third space. That is to say, a social and lived space. The third space to me is a space that evolves from the subversive, a space that pops up out of an agency and urgency. It is a space that gives refuge to the marginalized and power to the sidelined. It is a space of whisper, and this whisper is knowledge. The third space is not the center, but the corner of the room from which energy is generated, but constantly overlooked. It is that kind of space, both physically and conceptually, that we see in Nassim Roushid's work, and it is also the space I imagine for the Xenopolis. To me, the third space is that space where other epistemologies are negotiated and disseminated, where hierarchies are questioned, where histories intersect with the various assemblies of peoples. It is a space of and for art rather than a representation of anything. This is also to say that, for me, an exhibition should be or have that potential of a third space. If one were to read this from Sawyer's perspective, the first space would be the museum or the kind of art space. I mean, the infrastructure in itself. The second space would be the fact that in that museum, in that space, artworks are shown, maybe for the entertainment of people. And the third space is then the assembly of people, the social relations that emanate between the people and the artworks that are shown there, the political discourses that arise within such contexts, the way hierarchies could be reversed in such a context, and especially how power structures could be subverted within such a framework. So the last kind of chapter I have here is it will grow with time. So it's really, as I said, it's in the making. So it's called If Baldwin Was Right. So if Baldwin, in his seminal essay, The Creative Process, was right that the primary distinction of the artist is that he must actively cultivate the state of being alone, then I think an exhibition should be the place where an assembly of aloneness could be staged and interrogated in relation to the situation of our socio-political realities. If Baldwin was right that besides the fact that there are forever cities to be created, minds to be exploited, children to be fed, but that the conquest of the physical world is not man's only duty, as he is also enjoined to conquer the great wilderness of himself, then an exhibition should be that place where the wilderness of humanity can be put forth for others to explore, to discover, or the other way around. If Baldwin was right, that the precise role of the artist is to illuminate darkness, blaze roads through vast forests, and make the world a more human dwelling place, then an exhibition should be a manifestation of these endeavors. A space for elucidation, a space for struggle, not just a walk through the beaten track, but a place where a place to pave new ways, and above all, a space for conviviality, as I've said a few times. If Baldwin was right, that the artist is distinguished from all other responsible actors in society, say the politician, the legislator, even the educator, and the scientist, by the fact that he is his own test tube, his own laboratory, working according to very rigorous rules, however unstated this may be, then an exhibition should be that space where the laboratory deliberations, the processes, and maybe the results of the experiments could be presented and discussed. If Baldwin was right, that the artist must always know that visible reality hides a deeper one, and that all our action and achievement rests on things unseen, that a society must assume that it is stable, but the artist must know, and he must let us know, that there is nothing stable under heaven. The artist cannot and must not take anything for granted, but must drive to the heart of every answer and expose the question the answer hides. In that case, then I think an exhibition should be a space where complex questions should be posed, and where parallel realities could be scrutinized, and where the beauty of the complexity of the world could be exposed. And as Baldwin so aptly put it, the state and the role of the artist is to correct our delusions and expose to us the beauty of states of birth, suffering, love, death, which are extreme states, extreme, universal, inescapable. So I kind of wrote a conclusion, but I think I will not read it. Because I think I cannot conclude it. I think I have to continue writing, but time cut me short. So thank you very much for listening.
You enter any possible question very seriously, and from the perspective of the urgencies of today. And very seriously, you entered in this lecture as much in the state of the world and the importance of talking about a world of war and a world of movement, a world of fugitivity and a world of agency, and at the same time talking about exhibitions and the work we are doing. Not being afraid of the obvious contradiction between the fact that thinking exhibition as places where we can expose the question that answer hides might not be what is the first thing that is needed in relation to urgencies, in relation to migration, and in relation to war. I think this is exactly where we are now, and it would be, in a way, stupid, to only talk about, here in the context of the University of Applied Art, only to talk about activism without really relating to it, or B, only talking about exhibitions without stating the urgencies, or C, not seeing the contradictions. So I'm really glad that you did all of that, and that we are here now in a situation where it's completely left open. Do you think, I mean, do you think this is exactly what we have to do, to persist in relating to it and to see what will happen?
Well, I think we don't have a choice. Let me put it this way. I mean, yes, the contradictions are obvious, but I want to see exhibition making as a practice that is not confined within a certain circle. It's not meant for a certain group of people. It's meant for everybody. And with that, I want to see the practice, at least the thinking of what it could be as a possibility of engaging with realities. So these realities are the things that are actually omnipresent, you know, at certain points in time. How couldn't we deal with them? But then, that is just the one part. But I'm also very much interested in the performativity of, you know, of those realities. Take, for example, like the last lecture we had, where I was talking about you know, the occupation of the Gerhard Hauptmann Schule in Kreuzberg, and the fact that 40, you know, people were in that space, and you had 1,700 police officers standing out there trying to evict them. So to me, to see that, to try to understand the performativity in that context, within that, as a stage, you know, who is pulling the strings in that case? I don't know. Maybe the state is the exhibition maker in that case. But I see that as a stage reality, you know. So extending the space of making exhibitions and you know, or the concept of exhibition making out of the usual structures we have, you know. So that is what I would say. And you know, talking about the seriousness, I mean it's serious work, no? So how can we not take it seriously, you know? So beauty is one of the most, I mean, aesthetics is one of the most serious of things to think about. At least I want to see it that way. You know, and how things manifest, you know, how things develop, how things, you know, find their space, you know, within society is something one has to think about properly. How I find my space within myself, within society, my space within society, is something very important to think about.
Yeah, and now I want to put it on a very, you know, concrete level, maybe also in relation to the fact that you are running a space yourself, a very concrete space that has to survive. And I see a contradiction between, on the one hand, keeping the fragility and temporality open, keeping the space open for the possibility of the fugitive, and at the same time working on a certain continuity. The need to work on a continuity that makes it possible to have an infrastructure for the fragility and temporality.
So very good, but at some point I write that the state of fugitivity is a state of penultimumness. So it is not a complete state, it is a state of becoming. Okay, and that's how I consider savvy to be, what I consider savvy to be, you know. It is a space in becoming. It is not complete for many reasons. It's first of all not complete because we don't even have the money to do it. We don't even know how we're going to pay our rent next month. So it's in becoming. So that's the very first, very concrete thing. Then the second thing is that it is a space that deals with I would say the knowledge systems, you know, the epistemological structures that are created from those those voices from the corners. So take, for example, I mean, we have an exhibition going on now that is, I mean, with a complicated title, but it's on the economy of time and productivity and laziness. And I can tell you very easily that the point of departure was the discourse on Greece during the economic crisis. And you had the newspapers, the politicians saying that, oh, of course they have an economic crisis because they're all just lazy. So that as a point of departure to reflect on the economy of time. How do we use our time? Who defines what is lazy and what is laziness and what is leisure? You understand? Who defines that? Who defines how much time you have to spend on something? But of course, being very much aware of the fact that laziness is also a strategy. As Fanon put it, the feignant, the idea of being lazy as a resistance towards a colonial structure. So how do we use these things in a very concrete space? So we are dealing with these things within a structure, but I do not consider it static. It is in the building, but it is as fluid and as in so much flux as flux could be in itself. So yes. So to me, there it's a problem of definition of how static, or what static would be. As a scientist myself, I know that nothing is static. Everything is in motion. So it's flowing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a discussion I have a lot with Stefano. It's the contradiction for me between fugitivity on the one hand and continuity on the other. Between the need of a claim for continuity, if we would like to understand the concept of refuge, and the need to understand the fugitive as an agency in a world that is becoming more and more fluid in a neoliberal way. Where exactly as you said, the pop-up spaces are coming up and up and up, and the agency and resistance is just as pop-up as the neoliberal world is. But still, how can we deal with that? That we claim actually for both, for the right to stay and for the agency of fugitivity.
Beautiful. Yes. How can I answer that? The fact is also that the pop-up or the pop-upness of the fugitive is 1,000,000 times more than the pop-upness of the neoliberal structure. That is it. So the neoliberal structure cannot even catch up with that. So because we do not even know what is going on those various layers. Okay. Now, the continuity is also adopted within these spaces of the fugitive. You understand? But the thing is, without a structure, I would put it instead this way, with an amoebic structure. So by the time you catch that form, of continuity, it changes its form. But that is just how it has to be. Because take for example, if you are you're moving from you're escaping from one country to the other, you have to be able to adapt to that. I was talking to an artist, a friend, Hiwa K, who tried 5 times to come to Europe from Iraq. And, he was talking about the difficulties, okay, I think it is about redefining oneself. You understand? So it's about that. A constant state of redefinition. So even the kind of thing we would call, a kind of a continuity also has to be redefined, constantly redefined. So I don't know if it makes sense, but that, just trying to,
The right to stay in a state that is not as it is.
Yes.
It will change by this right to stay.
Yes. Yes.
So it's the claim for both at the same time.
Yes.
And now I translate this into the idea of the museum.
Mm-hmm.
It's the claim for a museum that is not giving up its own perspective of longue durée,
Mm-hmm.
but that is able to think its own perspective of longue durée as something that is able to redefine.
Yes. No, the museum, the museum's possibility of redefining itself, of finding itself within different geographies and time frames. I think that's the biggest challenge of the museum.
Thank you. I think it's now high time to open up for the public. I guess you have a lot of questions or remarks.
It would be in this form. I wouldn't use it in the form of making a spectacle out of it, but I will use it in the form of making a conversation with it. So as it's written somewhere, like what we do at Savi is we never talk about people. We talk with. You understand? We talk to. We try to situate ourselves within. But we do not talk about. So that would be the kind of way of dealing with it. So, but also understanding, and the paper I mentioned before, in that one I was trying to understand the position of the person, because when the police said they would storm the building, some people went up the roof, and they said, if you step into the building, we jump. So a kind of a position of a kind of reversal of power. So at that moment, you say through this idea of taking away their life, of committing suicide, they take the kind of create a moment of power for themselves. And I find those moments interesting. At least not only writing, and you understand we all chew these things, or we look at the victim and the victim and the victim, but also looking from their perspective and seeing how the kind of seize power for themselves. And of course the police didn't storm the building.
I thought this idea of Xenopolis is actually a very interesting idea, and it's kind of really true, because we're all strangers everywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand side, it's quite a sad idea, because we're all strangers, and we're looking at our world right now, like dating web pages are booming, and all strangers, nobody's getting in touch with each other. And actually, the exhibition is a place which is has not really rules. Sometimes people come together, sometimes they not come together. But for me, it's kind of interesting to find out. Maybe you have experienced or practiced in your space ideas how you can make from these strangers people who are actually getting together and communicate and become something more than just lonely strangers walking around, but more like this idea of assembly, people who are working together on an idea, on a notion, which are which they're taking from this exhibition or from each other in the exhibition and bringing on.
If we are aware of the fact that we are all strangers, actually do not think it's sad. Me, for one, actually it gives us the opportunity to humble ourselves, to say that you're a stranger, I always have to get to know you. So I keep away my assumptions or my kind of stereotypes or the kind of préjugement that I have towards you. Because I have to meet you. You are not somebody with a particular hair color or eye color, and I think I already know you. You understand? So I have to get to know you. You understand? I think it's actually, so, as you said, we are all strangers. But again, you see, if you look at concepts like, so again, I come back to my reality, living in Germany, where you have, it's become a norm that you have 22,000 people go up on the streets and then they say, wir sind das Volk. What are they actually talking about? So a kind of a homogeneous concept of a folk, I don't understand it. You understand? And look, understanding that this structure of the folk, and it's never been a homogeneous concept, you know. It's as heterogeneous as anything can be, you understand? But some people wanting to claim that, and I think that is the problem when we do not see ourselves as strangers. I want to see myself as a stranger, you understand? That is it. One part of the answer towards your question. Another possibility would be, or let me just keep to the issue of the art space. Yes, indeed. When we do exhibitions, and I talk about it, you know, referring Baldwin, saying that actually, when these lonely souls come together, and I think that is where the third space is when they interact with each other and they find some moments of togetherness. You know, there are moments of conviviality, moments of sharing certain things. They communicate, they create relations with each other and with the art, you know. So it's about that. So it's actually what we endeavor to do, we're trying to do all the time. So the exhibitions I generally do are supposed to be that way. So it's basically my interest and the way I think exhibition making should be, you know.
Are there certain techniques how you can reach? I mean, it's very unique every exhibition. There's no something like a rule, but they're like, do you know of some best practice examples where people like came in from nowhere and suddenly they start to talk and something they take away and something somewhere starts to grow, because actually what they take is not I'm like you and you're like me and we're equal, but it's the idea they share and they take with them and it starts to grow somewhere. It's like a plant.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I mean, I can hardly reinvent the wheel. Most of those things are out there. Nora and a couple of other people have written a lot about those things. I mean, you can create those moments, you know. I mean, we have something like called Colonial Neighbors. It's an archive we put up in 2011. And what was the idea behind that? So, within this small art space, we said, okay, we are not very satisfied with the way the Germans talk about their colonial history, or the way they do not talk about their colonial history, to put it in a better way. So we said, we want to do a kind of an archive on that colonial history. But what do we do? I mean, I'm not a historian, and I don't even know how to do archives. So what did we do? We did a call for people to look in the attics, in the cellars, to see if they could find anything that could relate to a German colonial past. And you can imagine how many people brought stuff. And that's it. People found albums, they found postcards, you know. We create such moments. So what do? We have a kind of an archive. I know we kind of theorize, blah, 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 blah. But then what we do is we invite artists to interact with these archives as well. So an artist would bring an object that gets into conversation with an object that we have in this archive. And it grows from there, you know. So that's how we try to take it to other places, you know. But there are other many ways to do it. You know, that's just one example, you know. We eat a lot together, we drink a lot, just as examples, you know. And we do, I mean, so when we started the space, we did, I mean, it was started in 2009. We did the first real exhibition in 2010, January 2010. We said that for every exhibition we do a meal.
So the openings were always made with food. And then, you know, and back then we had articles that would say, oh, you got into the gallery and it was stinking of food. Tant pis. But what we got out of that is, after 2 years, 3 years, and people will write about olfactory, you know, some kind of beautiful odor and so on and so forth, you know, but we do it. We just want to do it so that people stay there. It's just also for practical reasons. They shouldn't leave the exhibition opening and go to have dinner somewhere. So we want them to stay. So we do it. Another thing we did was that for every exhibition we do a party in the exhibition space. So you come to the opening at 7 p.m., you look at the works, you eat there, you stay there, you dance, and you go home at 3 a.m. in the morning. You stay. So, listen, it's as banal as it is, but those are our strategies to keep people. And that is part of exhibition making, I must tell you. It's the most important part, to conceive that. And it's, of course, we invite DJs that play to the themes we're working on. So it's not some kind of random bullshit, but it's like, DJs like they think about the economy of time, and then they play on that. We're working on a show right now that starts on the 3rd of June, and we've invited a composer to think with us through the making of the exhibition. You know, so we have 19 artists. The composer will come up with the soundscape based on the concept, and yes, then we have of course, you know, a DJ that's going to play for that night. On the 14th, this coming week, next week, on the 14th, we're invited to do a kind of, to be part of a long night of ideas. So what do? We wrote a concept, we proposed a concept on learning the given. So, of course, it was because of the institution that invited, you know, the Auswärtige Amt. So we say, but what ideas are you actually talking about? Why don't we start by unlearning some of those ideas? So what we do is, instead of doing the kind of long night that we're thinking of, like, say, doing something from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., we say, no, we'll start at 6 p.m. on the 14th and go until 6 a.m. in the morning. Do a real long night of ideas. And what do? We've invited, I don't know how many people, maybe 20 performance artists, people giving lectures. And they'll give lectures from 6 p.m. to midnight. And from midnight, we have 6 DJ sets, each DJ playing for 1 hour. So unlearning through the body. So not only unlearning through the talks people are going to come and give, but how do we unlearn through performativity, through the body, so the idea of corporal literacy, you know, which is something very central in our work. How do we unlearn through the way we gesticulate, the way we dance, the way we, you know. So those are the kind of strategies we come up with.
Just wanted to add maybe something that I experienced at your space, because for me this was also somehow the infrastructure. We already talked about infrastructure today, and this was this archive that you mentioned and the library that turned out to an amphitheater. So it was a very clever way of sitting together, having a library, and then on the other hand, like, totally make it a communication room. And I must say I never saw it before, and it still is in my mind that this also through this structure you change the way of communication and bringing people together.
Yes, thank you. That's true. So I think what she mentioned is it's a structure called Mutant Matters, which we came up with a couple of architect designer friends of ours. So again, reflecting on how to use space and how to create space.
As you put it out, the third space is not a space of choice. You don't have a choice to be in third space. It's a space which is created by pressure, by violence. Yes. People are forced to be in that third space. Is that concept adapting that as a curatorial tool, not risking to get cynical, kind of adapting that to institutions which are pretending to be under the same pressure? Isn't there a risk? I mean, not in your own practice, but in a general concept, isn't there a risk in that?
Well, but an institution cannot be a third space. So the third space becomes that kind of relations, it's the social space. It is not the institution in itself, but also there's a possibility of also getting into that space on your own will. So if you take the concept of like you would call them the punks, the people that get out of society, that are not satisfied with those other spaces, they want to exist within another space. So it is not only like from outside onto you, it could also come from within. So that's how I see it. Okay, about institutions adopting such concepts and misusing them, we can hardly do anything about that, But I think that the third space actually does exist. So I think Soya actually, there are these examples. So you would say a third space would exist within a kind of a market structure as well. Why not? So the market would be, the first space would be the fact that it is a marketplace, the structure, the infrastructure of that marketplace. The second space would be the fact that you go there to buy certain things, and that is the act, that act accommodates the second. The third space would be the kind of things that might happen there, the kind of people you might meet there, and the kind of relations that might also grow out of that. You see, so that is also something one should understand as a third space, So it depends also on from what theoretical direction you come from, but it is, yes. There's also beautiful examples of like, the hammam, those kind of structures, those kind of places.
Give room to the unintended, maybe.
The unintended. Those kind of sometimes very spontaneous relations that get out of that come up from such spaces. But what I'm talking about now is also intentionality. How can we adopt this, the fact that we could actually make people come together, we could actually create spaces such that, when I get into some of the galleries say in the Auguststrasse, I want to leave immediately because they do not give me that possibility of wanting to stay in there. They do not think of wanting to be a third space.
As I understand it, there is a certain unstoppability of the undercurrents.
Yes.
It's, if we try to make this idea of the assembly, as you have presented it today, as a practice that occurs in the fragility and temporality of spaces, if we try to make it a method, it might be a second space, but it would not mean that the third space will occur because there is a certain unstoppability.
Yes.
So however capitalist the world might be we live in, however fascism might grow, people will still think and be together.
Exactly.
And this is actually what you are talking about.
That is it. She could just give the lecture. No, it's great. It's well put. No, very well said. Well put. Yes. Thank you.
You said before that you don't talk about people, but to these people. And my question is, where is the audience? So if you talk to the people, and you also said that some people come and look at the art. So is the art the talking to the people, or is it something else? And where is the audience in this kind of concept?
Also a very good question. So now, I might be mistaken. Please correct me if I got it wrong. I don't know if it was Bacon or Duchamp that talked about the art becoming complete only when it's seen by the audience. I don't know who said that. But so what I'm trying to say is that the audience is part of the whole thing. it's in conversation. The spectacle could easily pop up in the sense that, especially if, I mean, you could, I mean, we've seen a lot of terrible things. In the past year or so, you had the impression every artist wanted to work with refugees in Berlin, for example. And one of the critiques I had from the very onset was that for who are you doing this? Are you doing it for yourself, for the refugee, for the society, or for whom? I think that is the question that comes up, you know. So if that question is answered, then we have an answer to the question, to your question in general. So I think if it's a conversation and you really want to, it's not about helping somebody, it's about thinking together, deliberating together. No, I mean, we're living in very, 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 very difficult times, you know. And I mean, I cannot just sit there and think that that has nothing to do with me. But I have to deal with it with the tools I have within my own capacity. And my own capacity is the fact that I am an exhibition maker and I have to deal with these things. How do I do that? Without making that, without objectifying. I think that is it. And of course, it's a constant struggle. I'm not saying I have a solution for it, but it's a constant questioning of how to do that. So the audience is part of it.
If you maybe would talk tonight another context, yeah, a company which is selling oil, or I just say something now, maybe they would think, what is this guy talking about? We have other problems at the moment which are much more important to solve. He's just crazy and, I don't know, idealistic or whatever.
Okay, if I understood your question properly, it's about translatability, you know. So, because you talked very much about language and the fact that we might not be able to understand.
No, because you mentioned that you can't understand, for example, that people in Germany are assembling themselves to define their own, you know, because they cannot imagine, even though they have the experience, to feel a stranger. I think it's always also a question of experience.
Yes, but I get you, but your experience doesn't stop you from being dumb. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that, of course, there is a certain experience they come with, but it's just, I mean, if they go out there and they come up with some kind of nationalistic paroles, then I think it's dumb. So as much as they have the right to say that and so on, I have my right to say that as well. So what I'm trying to say is that still, these in-between zones, so if you were to go back to the issue of language, I like the concept of pidgin, for example, you know, the kind of pidginization, the kind of, you know, so the strangeness you have within the family, within the society, within the state, and so on, is negotiated with a kind of structure for which nobody could say that belongs to you, or to you, or to you, or to you. So things get mixed up. Some of us have had to live with that because we come from, we were colonized. Okay, so you're forced to grow up speaking 5, 6 languages, and then a kind of another language which is a mixture of all those languages. Then you have to deal with that. But that is what life brings with it. So I like to think within these zones of pidginization. So if you take it, you make a bigger concept out of it, it would mean that not standing there to say wir sind das Volk, or being completely out there, but saying that we create zones where things belong to all of us, or they don't belong to us. at all. There's no right over certainly neither language nor a culture, which is in any case like that. Which culture belongs to whom? You know, things flow. So I think basically that's what I'm trying to say. Yes, and so I'm still thinking about, you know, like talking in an oil company. I think it's good. I was once invited to speak to a group of 50 or so diplomats, German diplomats that were preparing themselves to go out into the world. And intentionally, I came with my most radical speech. And you could see their chins falling. So, of course, they thought, what an idiot. But of course, I did that intentionally to provoke certain reactions. And also, through that, the hope that they understand something about what I'm doing and the places they might be going to. So, but I don't leave the place thinking that, oh, we should all be on the same page and we should all love each other. No, I'm not interested in that.
Why not?
Why not? I mean, so I have to think about that. I don't want to be loved by everybody. No, on a serious note, because you cannot always just say things that people want to listen to.
To talk about eminent and pressing questions of our society, but at the same time we are dealing with institutions that within their structures are not dealing with these questions at all.
Okay.
So I'm more interested in how to actually implement.
Very good. I mean, I could point out very clearly that, like the Gorky Theater, it's a kind of a space that, looks around and sees something is happening. How do we react to that? But I have the impression, honestly, that the more, visual art spaces are snoring, So just to say it, and I mean, I could tell them that too. I think that is the question. That is the issue. Of course we've planned painting show. Just to reflect on painting, and we cannot just postpone it. Of course, I understand that those economies, but I think there's other things that are more pressing than that. Having the possibility of reacting. I mean, again, from a very, 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 humble perspective, I say that. So 2 years ago when this thing happened, that building was occupied, half of Kreuzberg was shut down. What do we do? In the space of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we came up with a project. There's this beautiful poem by Derek Walcott. And he talks about the sea, turning pages in search of history, So it's like the sea is history, I think is the title of it. And it became so important for us, because of what was happening in the Mediterranean and so on and so forth. So we said we'll convene, we'll do a kind of a come together with a subtitle on the state of refugees. What did we do? With no money, of course we don't have the money. We had a program and exhibition coming up. We said we postpone it. And we invited, some of the refugee activists that were out of the building. We invited philosophers. We invited artists. We invited the spokesperson of the police. We invited the critical police from Hamburg. You know, people that have left the police institution to become critical of the police. You know, we invited, you know, designers and so on and so forth to come together and to think of this state of refugees. So 4 days of intensive thinking. That is all we can do.
Yeah, so basically that was my question. How do you deal with this, that you, or that I also in a way always on the search for the third space maybe, but then also in a way occupying the space, maybe as a stranger or maybe as someone who should not be there in the first place?
No,
yeah.
I get your question. You said something about the colonization of the third space. I do not think that it can be colonized. I do not think so. Why? Because it's there. We do not even have access to it. Occupying a space of, say, precarity doesn't mean, you know, getting there. So what I'm trying to propose is this possibility of acknowledging the knowledge that could emanate from such a space. And listen to it, keeping the ears open. And it's not bad to do that, because there are voices out there, and I think society is actually better if we listen to some of those voices. You know, look, like, okay, another example. If you were to go, say, to my grandfather who lives in Batu somewhere out there, and you would, you know, even me, I'll give an example of something I asked. So this man, who's my mother's father, belonged to a society called the Kuifon. And I thought, okay, he's 96 years old, why not do an interview with him? I went there and I talked, he looked at me like this. No word. Why? I don't have access to that space. He's not going to give me access to that space. You understand? He would welcome you, but he wouldn't give you access to it. But how can we listen to some of these things? How can we? I haven't found the key to get in there, and I cannot occupy it. I can't. With all power I have, I cannot colonize it. And I think that's the beauty of it. And when I talk about this amoebic form and so on and so forth, by the time capitalism and whatever has thought of going in there, it has changed its form. That's the beauty of the space.
Thank you very much.